Very welcome, Mitesh. Uh, for those who don't know Mitesh, he's a YouTuber. He creates courses on Emacs and Clojure. He's an avid blogger, and he's also the CTO. He was the CTO of a startup called Taza Kitchen that he scaled from zero to 150k ARR. I think that was in a year's time. Hmm. Yeah, and and I met Mitesh when he messaged me. Like I think he liked some of my posts on Twitter, and then I reached out to him and tried to figure out what he was doing, and then we decided that we should talk about React Native. Uh, we had changed the topic a little bit. Like I have changed my opinions. It was supposed to be a debate, but now it's more of a
Discussion.
it's more of a praise for React Native.
Yeah.
So let's delve into it, Mitesh, directly. Tell me about yourself. How did you get started? And introduce me like you would to
Mhm.
somebody who doesn't know you.
Awesome. So I started programming because of my desire to hack games. I was a huge gamer back in the day, and I just wanted to write bots, hack them. I even had a lot of YouTube videos up explaining how to use cheat engine and stuff to figure hacks in games. And that kind of led me to naturally trying to become a programmer, and that's how I started learning Java, C, Linux, and all sorts of things. And eventually, after working a little bit, I decided to co-found a startup, a hyper local grocery delivery startup. Like we deliver in just a small locality, not a huge one, and that was pretty good. We kind of worked on it for 2 years. I was the CTO. I had a team, people who were looking into operations management. Like we were a couple of people, and I think I learned a lot there. And that is where I kind of got introduced to React Native. Right, we needed our apps. We needed a iOS app. We needed an Android app. We had a lot of apps for the people in our warehouse who were packing the food items, the grocery items. We had an app for the delivery boys, like an Uber like app for the delivery boys who would actually be routed, like this is your next place to go, and they had the GPS on. So that's kind of where I had a decision to make, right? Like we need 5 to 6 different apps, and one of them has to be an iOS app, and I know nothing. I don't know Android. I don't know iOS. What do I do? So that's kind of where I started with React Native. And after that is done, now now I've taken a completely huge turn, and now now I'm working with Clojure and Clojure Script. So for the past year or two, I have no interactions with the React Native community, so it's kind of at the back of my mind. But I've been a huge from the day RN was released, right? Like I've been hugely excited for it. It's a piece of technology which allows me as an individual, right? Not as a huge team. I've always worked with small groups of teams, small startups, just focused on solving a problem. And for people like me, React Native is just it's a huge boon, right? You don't need to learn okay, you do need to learn platforms, but not in depth as you can with React. And I already was writing a lot of React beforehand. Love the React model of doing things. Love functional programming, as you know. So yeah, that's how kind of I got started. What about you, Shivek? What's your story with React Native?
I started React. Like I'll just digress. I'll come back to what I do,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to take the discussion a step back,
Okay.
and I want to talk about the channels of delivery of software. So we
Yep.
started with mainframes, and the channel was your punch cards.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow we reached personal computers, and the channel was a local machine because we did not have a concept of internet.
Yep.
So the delivery had to be
Mm-hmm.
parcel based. So you have to send a floppy or a CD to someone for them to get your software.
Yep.
And then this amazing thing, this decentralized beast came along, and everything was SaaSified, which was great.
Yep.
So you do not have to care about the idiosyncrasies of your operating system or the versions of the operating system, as long as you have a browser. And that made sense. Like that was the survival of the fittest, and that was around 80s, maybe 85, 90s. And now we have been doing that for more than 2 decades, and that is the standard model. Like if you were to build a company in software, unless you have legal constraints or security constraints, you would build it probably on the web. Do you think that that's the right way to go about it, especially when we have mobile devices which are pretty stable in terms of the operating system and also the performance? So there are no changes there are very little changes depending on the platform, and none if you stay on the same platform, almost none if you stay on the same platform. And the power efficiency and the performance is way better, like orders of magnitude better than what we can get on the web. So the problem that web fixed, we don't have that problem anymore, but we still choose to stay with the limitations of the web. What do you think about this?
That's a super interesting question. Um, that's so what I really think is that change is hard to bring by, right? So once something has kind of set itself as a standard, people start adopting it. So let's say JavaScript, right? Like JavaScript has a lot of issues, but since people have already started using it, now if I come in and say let's skip JavaScript, let's replace it with something else totally different, right? That's just not possible. So I think this is kind of the place. This is kind of the natural evolution which took place, right? We started using the web, everybody got used to the web, we started upgrading the web principles, right? The like so much of the web spec was not present beforehand, which is like present now. And
Yes.
yeah, and kind of these, so not only with the web but with the web browsers as well. So I really think that the browsers are what is dictating the web instead of web itself dictating what web should
Yeah.
be. So
Yes.
that's also kind of a natural evolution which is taking place with Google, Safari, Mozilla doing their own thing. So that's really interesting. I think if we had full native, like if there was a magic wand which we could replace everything with a single language, which is probably the best language, maybe
React
closure
Native.
script. So yeah, that would definitely be a better world to live in right now, but unfortunately I don't think that's where we are going.
Yeah. So I had a similar discussion with a friend of mine,
Mhm.
and we came to the conclusion that if we were to build something like that, the language of choice would be JavaScript.
Oh, that's interesting.
And we reached there because of reasons similar to yours, since everybody uses JavaScript, and the standard is almost set, and the community is huge. Like
Yep.
you can just tap into the ecosystem and deliver stuff. So JavaScript would be the de facto language. But there's one other aspect of languages that we don't really shed light on, and you can think of it like we can only say it with examples. So right now TypeScript is hot, and everybody, if when I ask people in interviews like why do you choose TypeScript over other JavaScript variants, the answers I would get is it's really cool. It helps you with code completion, and there's no underlying principle as to why you chose a language. I think the same was true in the 90s for Java, because Oracle was putting in a lot of money into marketing Java to enterprises and also just marketing Java to developers. And now Microsoft is backing TypeScript. So this perspective is probably not complete, and there are definitely merits to the language, certainly if you compare it to JavaScript. But I think it's more marketing oriented, and not due to the merits of the language itself, not due to the mathematical foundations of the system itself.
Yep, I think I absolutely agree with that. And so what are the technical merits, right? Because I'm sure depending on people, right? So the folks over at Figma, right? They're building something totally crazy than what I would build on an e-commerce. So they
Yes.
probably do need a different technical merit for a language than what I do need. So you're kind of right. Like there's no one size fits all over here. But maybe there is some kind of a protocol, right? Like maybe WASM or something like that, which kind of has this stable standard set of APIs across different browsers, which browsers have to implement.
Hmm.
That language can also be used in the backend, not maybe backend, but maybe in the native applications, right? So, for example, Microsoft is now pushing React Native for Mac OS, React Native for
Yeah,
Windows,
that's crazy.
right? So maybe not JavaScript, or maybe JavaScript, but at least there should be some kind of a protocol, some kind of a committee which standardizes these things, right? Like, can
Yes.
we not completely just rely on HTML and how the way it works? Can we
Yes.
have some kind of a better reactive principle? Can we have some kind of a better way to do things, which is standard? And then you can have a different implementation, but at least the protocol and the interfaces are abstracted in a way. That's kind of what
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think that would be great, but there are bureaucratical hurdles in the way of that concept, because
Yes.
I don't think Apple would want people to get away from Swift or Objective C.
Absolutely.
If there were to be a standard, I think React would make a good standard, but there is also Vue and other two-way binding systems. But in my opinion, React gets out of your way. It lets you think of UI as data.
Yep.
So, at the end of this discussion, like, in my head, I thought that Clojure is the way to go, because Clojure is a scripting language as well as a very strong functional language. Like, it also gets out of your way and lets you script in other languages. I think we are missing a good Clojure to C compiler or Clojure to Go or Rust compiler. That's one aspect that's missing in the community, and that's why we lack in terms of speed. So if it's a performance centric system, I don't think Clojure. It depends on the scale. If you have unlimited power, then it works. Like, you can use Clojure anywhere. But if you are on embedded devices, for example, or a mobile device, then it won't make sense. So
Yep.
that's one thing we should look into. But let's go back to React Native. So you told me about your experience with React Native, and when I contacted you the last time, I was saying that React Native is not the way to go, and you should go full native.
Yes.
And at that point, I had some flaws and problems that I was facing with my React Native application. So tell me the places where React Native really sucks, like the places where you wouldn't want to write React Native, or the conditions or the problems where React Native doesn't do well.
Right. Um, so React Native kind of has a really bad way to track errors. I think I've just never read that red screen and just figured out what the problem is. I've always had a first principle approach, like, let's follow the data flow, like what's happening, read every line of code and then figure out the issue. So I think that's been a problem, but I'm not sure, like, I haven't used it in 2 years, if that
No,
is
it
improved or
is.
not.
It could be, because I am using React Native with Clojure, so my stack traces are in a different world, in a different dimension. But yeah, I
Yeah.
get what you mean.
Right.
And
So that's one of the issues. I think the other issue was with the JavaScript engine, right, which they have on iOS and Android. I think it's like two different engines, and so you can't be 100% sure if the code you're writing works. If it works on Android, it must still break on iOS. So I think that
so
was
they have fixed it now with Hermes.
okay.
They have created a new engine, and that's stable across the platforms.
Okay, that's wonderful. Then that I think that's a huge upgrade, because that is one of the major issues I had with React Native. Um, what else can I think of which sucks in React Native?
Performance.
No, okay, so yeah, so I'm not the kind of person who writes performance. Like, I'm not dealing with apps which need performance. I'm dealing with mostly enterprise app, corporate apps, user-facing apps, like simple e-commerce stuff, not anything fancy. So I don't think I'm well educated enough to talk about performance. But yes, list views are really bad in React. Like, even if you have like 1,000 2,000 items, it starts to lag. So yes, that definitely is an issue. But yeah, I don't think I have too many complaints with React Native, right? Except for JavaScript, maybe. Right? So if I'm writing React Native in the future, it has to be through Clojure script. I'm never going deep down into JS world. And now that React is changing a little bit with hooks, and like a lot of libraries don't use state properly. Like, they have embedded state, hidden state, which kind of makes it hard to convert it into the Clojure script world. I think those are some of my problems, but I don't think those are problems with React Native itself. One more problem I can think of is that I'm not sure if this is an RN problem, but Android API is really bad. Like, it keeps changing. Like there's like 10 different ways to support like 50 different devices, and that kind of leaks over into React Native. Like, React Native cannot 100% abstract that out. So like, upgrades are a huge pain if you want to move from one version to another. Facebook kind of keeps introducing new things, right? Like 0.59 to
Yeah.
0.6. I remember there was a huge deal around it, where a lot of
The
backward.
velocity is very high, the update velocity.
Yes, yes, and for small teams, right, who really benefit from React Native, it's not possible to keep up with them all the time. Like, let's say if you're a consultancy, you have 10 different clients and you have 10 different React Native apps, and then you need to port over 10 different React Native apps to get to the latest version. I think that's a huge issue. So I think
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so a little bit of stability could definitely help. But yeah, I think that's the only thing I can think of right now.
There's one more thing that I pointed out the last time we talked, and I said that, oh, I talked about performance, and you said that you reach a point where you're facing performance problems, and then you start writing native code.
Yep.
At that point, that suggestion sounded to be very reasonable, and it took in like I looked into it, I researched. But right now, in the app that I'm building, we have about 600,000 downloads. There are not many active users, but it's a fairly active app. It has about 7,000 commits. It has been being worked on for 3 years, and it's completely React.
Awesome.
At this point, it's a chat application. The chat performance is not at par with WhatsApp. It cannot be, or with iMessage. It's written in React Native, and there's nothing we can do to port it because it doesn't serve any business purpose. It cannot be justified because porting it would take maybe 6 months, and we might not be able to do it completely because it has built over time. It has grown like a tree. So I don't think porting or writing native code is always an option. So the promise that if you're facing performance issues, just write Objective-C code is a little short sold, because when it comes to practice, you can't really change.
Yeah, but yeah, I think I completely agree, because again the problem comes, right? If your team is short, you probably don't have expertise in writing native code. You're probably an expert JavaScript person, and figuring out all of the all of the Apple and Android stuff is going to be a huge task. Like, it's not going to be easy. Even just creating a simple, like, one small component which is native in your entire React Native app, I think it's a huge deal. So yeah, I kind of agree that the business use case isn't very strong. But for folks like Discord, right? I think they've managed to have an entire that's like an amazing app. I think
Yes,
nobody
but they
can say
had
like
to
there's a
hire
performance
like a
issue in
proper
there.
team. There is actually, like, there's a bug in React Native with the list views where the indexing only happens in one direction. So if you want to jump to a message, you can go downwards but not
Oh.
upwards. So it's an open issue, but it's probably hard. So it's just lying there. And Discord is an exception. Not many companies reach a user base like Discord does.
Yep.
So they can probably put 5, 10, maybe 15 people and just solve their problems. Even then, it's hard. Because you don't just need to know how React Native works and Android and iOS works. You also know why things were built in this specific order over many years of time. So you need all that research. You need to capture all that baggage, reduce it to insights, and then only then you can implement it. So that is the hidden elephant that nobody talks about.
Yes,
So
yes. I think, yeah.
I completely agree that you can take if you want to build a React Native application for enterprise users where performance will never be an issue, or you know that you'll never reach more than a few thousand users, then it completely makes sense because you can simply win.
Yep.
And if I were to build an application, I'm really waiting for somebody to write Android bindings for closure. That would be the ideal world for me. Implement Android into Repel. But until then, I would want to. This is also very subjective. If it's a B2C app and I know it, then it will be Android or Objective C.
Yep. Yeah, I think
Uh,
that makes sense. Yeah, please continue.
So coming back to the original question, like, is web the correct delivery mechanism? So what are the options? React Native is one. What else do you think we can do?
That's interesting. I kind of believe, I kind of have this dream, like, what if Apple, Google, and all the other tech giants, right? They come together and then they say, let's remove the app stores, right? Let's cut our revenues.
The
Let's
audacity of that dream
yeah,
is
let's
scaring.
yeah, let's
It's
shoot
frightening.
ourselves in the foot for the greater good, and let's make web what it needs to be. Like if that can happen, right? If web browsers, if companies, if they hold hands together, they go crazy kind of, and if they do that, I think that's my dream. Like
Hmm.
web is a huge platform, right? It's easy to get into. It's open. There's no force which is stopping you to put a website on your on whatever domain you want to. I think I like that openness rather than
Yeah,
the closed ecosystems whatever a new company is going to bring in the next decade or two. So yes,
true.
I think I would definitely prefer web as a platform rather than native operating systems as a
Yeah.
platform.
So you're trying to remove, like, you're trying to move web out of the web browser. Just you bring
Yep,
it together, bring it at the OS level, maybe.
yep, kind
Have
of like
some.
yes. I think you're getting what I'm saying. Yep.
Mm. Uh, so, like, this gets into the realm of crypto. I'm not sure if you want to go there, but there is a concept of dapps,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a specific app that I want to talk about. It's called Radical. It's a decentralized Git client that you download on your system, and I think it's an Electron app. I'm not sure, uh, but it runs natively on Mac OS and Windows, and you don't need a system to interact. Like, there are no servers because Git as a protocol is pretty sorted in terms of maintaining timestamps with Merkle trees. So you could have a local repository, and your team members could have, like, you would be connected to your team members using your keys, and you can access those repositories without any need for an intermediary like GitHub, and all the issues and discussions are managed in a decentralized way. So every data that you interact with and need is in your system. What do you think about an approach like this one?
For the entire web.
Yeah, like, just push it.
uh,
Let's see how radical it could be. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
it's definitely radical. That's an app name. Um, and I think I've heard of this. I've heard of radical.
Radical.
That's too crazy of an idea, right? I think my brain just can't comprehend the scale at which web
Hmm.
works. I think it's very hard to just put that into your brain, right? Like what's the real scale and what impact that can have. So
Hmm.
I don't think I have any strong opinions on this, but I would kind of I would that wouldn't be my first choice, right? Like let's try to fix it in the way it's working already. If that is not
Yeah,
possible, let's try to take a 360 180 U-turn and just figure out a new way.
but I think we have already done it in the form of apps, and this is also slightly skewed because most web data is on mobile, which simply means that apps are more used than websites. But it could also be that apps provide a better experience, and they actually do, in terms of the performance, in terms of the feel, and in terms of the UX. It's definitely better. Not for me, but I'm talking stats. I am somebody who would stick to my bigger screen, but more than 80% of the traffic on the web is mobile.
Yep.
So, I, in a sense, I feel it's already there, but we are not exploiting it because the tooling available to build something like Radical is not sorted. So you have to be audacious. You have to do your own research, and that's not always aligned with the business goals. So there's always a gap. So we always rely on somebody like Linus to come forward and build you the operating system, build you your real estate, so you can just paint the walls.
Yep.
And we are missing a new Linus. Like, we're missing a Linus of 2020 or whatever the era is.
Yeah, yeah, I think I agree, and I think you brought up a very interesting point here. Is that I as a tech person, right? I don't use my mobile phone a lot, but when I
Yeah.
do, I mostly use apps for specific websites. Like I know like
Hmm.
these are the 4 to 5 different services I use, and those are like my top 80% of the time I spent on the mobile, and those are apps. For the remaining 20% is what I open Firefox on my phone.
Okay.
So and even so, for example, I'll give you an example of LinkedIn, right? So I had the LinkedIn app installed because I got the notifications. I was chatting with few people over there. That was cool. But then LinkedIn app kind of started pushing. There's this dark patterns like they are doing, right? And that kind of forced me to uninstall it. And
Yeah.
so I went to the web app. So so the better user experience which you are saying, right, the apps provide, I think that is definitely a huge factor because I have experienced it. Apps are much more user friendly than web apps, but I'm not so sure why it is so. For example, Reddit, so the Reddit web mobile UI, right, they just don't let you use it. Like they just have this
Yeah.
pop up all the time,
That's
like
such a
either open
dark
it.
pattern. Yeah.
Yep. So maybe that is the reason, right? So if web was a better platform, maybe the web apps would be as good of a user experience that apps were. Like if companies didn't have have this hidden agenda, right? Like let's push users to the app because we can mine more data. If they didn't have this, maybe their web apps would be the best performance, right? And we could just have a progressive app, like we could have an icon on the home page of maybe iOS or Android, whatever, and just open that web browser. If that was easy enough, I think web apps would be a great user experience, which it isn't currently. Like most of the apps
Yeah.
don't, most of the web apps don't provide that kind of a experience to
I think
users.
there's definitely the moral component that companies have to mine your data and that's how they work. But there's also a visual aspect to it, uh, like the rendering engine probably. And I'm talking on from the I'm defending the nerds here by saying that the rendering engine is better if you are running natively, and that is like you cannot argue with it.
Correct.
Do you know that there are more than 10% of the world's population has some sort of visual defect? Either it's not, it's probable that it's not diagnosed, but it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely present. So it could be, uh, there's a problem with reading that I've, dyslexia.
Dyslexia. Yep.
There's impairment with sight, like you cannot see or read, or you might be myopic or the other one. Uh, Apps win there because the rendering is better. So if we remove the dark patterns, I feel apps do way better. But yeah, I don't think we can remove the dark patterns, can we?
As long as money is in the picture.
I think dapps and the Ethereum community and the crypto community in general is very focused, uh, is a more pure version of what we see, probably because they are new and they are very open in the sense the code is open source. You can audit it, you can stop from being tracked, things like that. But even they have to stick to web applications because there's no protocol, and then they end up building experiences which are built from a good intention, but they're not as user friendly as a bank's app would be, or as secure either. But that's a different question.
Yep.
We cannot, yeah, match it. Okay, so while researching and while looking into things, uh, I wanted to build an application, and I had a choice, a desktop application. So I could write React Native, or I could write Electron. Do you have any experience with Electron? Do you think it's a good technology?
um I have experience that I've followed the tutorial of Electron. I've built something really simple and stupid in there. But apart from that, no, I don't really have huge experience with Electron. But I'm kind of really impressed with a lot of companies which what they've done with Electron, right? I think VS Code is one which
One,
pops up
yeah.
into my mind. And VS Code does not feel like an Electron app. Like you can't convince me of it. It just feels like a native app to me. At least at my perception level, the like 10,000 lines of file I can open, and it just doesn't feel any less responsive than my Emacs does. So I think that just speaks for the platform, right? Like you can achieve really awesome things with Electron, but at what scale,
But
right? You
VS
need.
Code, but VS Code is not completely Electron. A large portion of VS Code is not open source. That's probably native. We
Ooh,
don't know about it.
is that
So
true?
yeah.
Oh my god, this is the first time I'm hearing of it.
Yeah, like it's not well advertised. I should definitely post links here because it sounds really controversial. And
Yes.
Electron is the poster child. Like VS Code is the poster child for Electron.
Yep.
And it has a huge following, and VS Code has blown up like wildfire.
So yeah, so I actually don't trust Microsoft, right? Even though I kind of use a lot of Microsoft products, because what happened was when they were I think it's around 2 years back. I tweeted about it. Basically, they closed source their Python language server. So they're building this language server. They have it open source, and then they take a U-turn. They say that sorry, this is closed source now. We are going to make a lot of changes, a lot of cool features, and we are not going to open source it. And from now on, it's completely closed. And what sense does this make, right? It's a language server. It's built for developers. It needs to. What's the point of having a closed language server, right? Like, why do you even want to build a language server at that point? So
They probably thought they could sell it later, like JetBrains does.
Yep. So that was the day I stopped using VS Code. I was like, nope, this is not for me, and I went straight back to Emacs. So I think I still definitely don't trust what Microsoft is doing. But yeah, I think a lot of companies. So even Pitch, right? Pitch is a closure script company. They use Electron for their desktop apps. So that's and it's really performant as well. Like, I really like using it.
Can
And
we
I've
talk
used a
about
lot of
Pitch?
other Electron apps.
Is it open? Like, can we talk about Pitch and your work about it?
I can't talk about what I'm working. Like, I'm just talking about in general what the company is doing.
Okay, yeah. Pitch is also one great application.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I'm very biased. Like, from the business person in me knows that that's the right way to go about it. But if I have a lot of free time in my hands, I would shift towards okay. So while researching, I also realized that there has to be some other ways to build native applications.
Yep.
So there's something called Qt that Nokia developed, and
Yep.
that is more close to the metal compared to both Electron and React Native. Probably it's at the similar abstraction as React Native for Mac OS or Windows. Have you looked into it? Do you have any clues about it?
By Qt, you mean Qt framework, right?
Yeah, Qt.
Yep.
The one that Nokia developed.
Yep. Yeah, I actually have used Qt like years back. Like back when I was, I remember this. I think I was on the GNOME desktop, and I wanted to build one of those icon tray bars. And I think back then, maybe GNOME or KDE, and they were using Qt for that. So I kind of I have done a little bit of what Qt does, but no, not really. I don't have that experience, but I've used a lot of Qt based applications, right? In Linux, Qt GTK based, and
Do
I
you
don't
have any examples? I have never used one.
Qt. So I think GIMP is not Qt based. I think so the licensing for Qt is really weird. I think for commercial, you have to get another pro license. It's not completely free for commercial usage. But yeah, I don't have any on the top of my mind. But I'm sure, like, I've used many of Qt based apps, and that's the thing, right? It's not adopted, so those apps are not better. It's not Qt's problem that they're not better. Is that there's not a lot of documentation, not a lot of community around it. There's not a lot of developer hours, right? Like, JavaScript ecosystem has millenniums of hours in.
It's flooded.
Yeah.
There's tsunami or developer.
Exactly. So that's kind of how we've gradually evolved. But yeah, I think native apps are really cool. I think I've used one Spotify native app once, and that was like blazing fast. Like,
That just came out recently. It was in Hacker News. Written in
Did
Rust.
no,
Yeah,
I'm not
just
talking about the
one-
Rust one. I think I used it long back, like years ago.
Okay. So I created a list of 5 native UI systems that were cross-platform. There's IMG UI, that's C-based, and it's very opinionated about how the components are rendered. Also the UI, the visual aspect of the components. Then there's JavaFX, which has similar issues like IMG UI, but it's less performant, and it is more the component system is more advanced. Like, it's bigger compared to IMG UI. There's one thing that specifically stands out. Actually, 2. There's one called Kotlin Compose. So Kotlin came up with this system where you could write multi-platform apps for Android and iOS. You write your business logic in Kotlin, and the Android views in Kotlin, but you write your iOS views in Swift.
Okay, so
And
you're
they,
sharing some code in there.
yeah, you're sharing the business logic. You can actually write some basic components in Kotlin as well, like iOS UI components in Kotlin, and they'll cross compile to C and it'll just work. But if you want to be a little fancy and build custom components, you just write Swift, and there is a native interaction mechanism where you could share the entire business logic. And
That's interesting.
yeah, that's called Kotlin multi-platform. They took the similar approach and they have built, it's in the process, it's not there yet. I think the alpha isn't out either. And they've built Kotlin Compose that will compile to native desktop, like true Swift code. And you can run it using native components, but you write just one language.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting.
that's something
I
I'm looking up to.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't think I've
people
heard
check
about
it
that
out.
yet. Yep.
Mm. It's very new,
Um.
it's very nascent.
Yeah. So
So
one. Yeah.
mm.
Please continue.
Go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
done.
So one thing which I kind of forgot talking about related to React Native was that, so most of the apps which we are talking about, right? Like these have reached like gigas, like these reached huge scales. Like these are B2C. They have a huge user base, but most of the developers in the world, right, they're working at apps which are not user facing. Like it's either an enterprise app, it's either a B2B, like I'm providing some service to a company. There's this glass manufacturer, he needs to automate some of his logistic stuff. There's so much of software being written for use cases which are not really user facing. And in those cases, right, where performance is usually a non-issue, I think that
Mm.
is where React Native is really growing without us even realizing what's happening. Because one of my colleagues, he works for like two of the biggest finance companies. Like one of them is the client, like both of them are his clients. Like these are the biggest finance companies in India, and they are building a lot of React Native apps.
Yeah,
like like all of those are like user facing, right? Like logistics, internal, HR, like there's tons. Like when COVID thing came out, like there were like 2-3 apps for COVID specific legislation around their company. Like they have 50,000 employees, like they need
Mm.
some specific app for that. So I think React Native is really growing behind the scenes as well. And
Mm.
we might not know it until, like just a common developer, like you just pick a developer and he's like, yeah, I already write React Native. Like it becomes so
I
obvious that
think we are
people
already there. I feel we are already there. I don't
I
think
think I kind of agree. Like
anybody
at least
would
every
not know
JavaScript
React Native.
developer, yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
But yeah, I think React Native is going to be its own thing, right? Like people are going to not even associate it with JavaScript anymore. Like we are going to reach a point where people are like, I just know React Native. I don't know JavaScript, but I know React Native.
What are your opinions on Flutter? Because I've seen people just shift to, like, I'm somebody who likes the React model, and I've been writing React since version 0.1, 0.11. And I wouldn't move to anything that's radically different, including two-way binding. And then I see people who have spent maybe two years building a React application, and they just decided to switch to Flutter, and they're very convinced. I've been tried to pull into the cult as well.
Um, so Flutter is really interesting, right? I think the most common problem with Flutter is that Google tends to stop supporting things after a while. I think
Mm.
that's where a lot of people stopped adopting Flutter. And the second thing is Dart, right? Like Dart is cool, but why Dart? Like why not just stick to something
Yeah.
else? Like what's the point? Why do I learn another language just for Flutter? Like doesn't make sense. The entire allure of React was that you're a JavaScript developer, start writing native code, and that's kind of defeated with Flutter. Even though Dart is quite easy, I don't think it's quite different. Like if you know at least Java or something, you're kind of set.
Mm.
But I think Flutter also has this. How do I put it? Like uh, th- I just never really found a reason to shift from RN to Flutter. Like, how do you convince me? Like, if RN can do most of the things right, huge community already which is present, why do I move to Flutter? Like, there's nothing. Like, if Flutter was in closure, right? Like, I would switch because that's something which is going to. I just know that that's going to help me. It's just going to be more fun, right? But what's fun with Flutter? Like, if you can't even get the most curious people attracted to your technology, how can you get the mass public to be attracted to it. I think that's where Flutter kind of
I,
failed, at least in my point of view.
same, like very similar opinions, but I think they sell on the fact that Flutter has better performance, which I'm not checked for myself. I've asked a few developers to showcase their Flutter applications, so I could just see for the obvious issues that you face with list views or feedback when you click buttons. It's probably a little better, but like to an untrained eye, I don't think it would make any difference.
Right. So I kind of have an anecdotal evidence here. So I kind of work for I do some open source contributions in a website called as Paryati. Like it's a Pali based Buddhist organization. So they actually decided to go with Flutter instead of React Native, and their reasoning was that they have more trust that Flutter is going to be stable for the next 10 years. Like they don't have a lot of resources to build it. So once they build their app, they kind of have this belief that we won't have to make a lot of changes to it over the next 10 years. Like it will keep on working for some reason.
Why? Like, what are the origins of the belief?
Yeah, so I don't know that in detail, but I just wanted to bring that up because that might be a perception which people have, that React Native breaks too often. Like
Okay.
things are a bit unstable, and Flutter seems a little bit more opinionated, maybe a bit more stable, and that is why people are choosing it. I think that could be one of the beliefs of choosing Flutter.
Okay, that's new, because in my opinion is the exact opposite of this.
Same same
Yeah,
here.
because React Native has stood the test of time. It has been around since 2016 in
Yep.
production. It's 2021, almost 21 already. And when did Flutter came out? Only GPay uses it, and GPay is not. I checked it. I downloaded GPay just to check the Flutter experience and their claims. I was not sold on it. It's good. Like, what would you consider a Google? I would not consider average. That's not how Google would work.
Yep.
There's also a point regarding Datlang uh, that ties to Golang, and there are a lot of criticism towards how Go is built. That Go forces you to do things the Go way, and that might not always be the most efficient way. And I read a blog where some senior developer was ranting that I don't want to do things the Go way. Like, why are you forcing me? I can get it done in a more efficient way. And somebody from within Google reasoned that Google hires by the ton. Like, they might hire a few thousand people every month. And most of these people, especially in the hiring season, most of these people are not developers. They are graduates. They just graduated from a good college. And they need something that's very uniform. So at their level, something like Go works very well because they have a standard technology which is good enough. Like, actually Go is great, but it comes at the cost of rules and discipline that was imposed. So they micromanage the language, and they did not manage. So they don't have to manage people. I think it's similar with Datlang as well, and that's why they want a language of their own. So they have strong control on the ecosystem, and they can build stuff as they wish, and everybody in their organization is used to it. So it could be a muscle memory thing as well.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I think that's a great and really interesting point, right? So they've kind of solved their non-technical problem with a technical solution,
Yeah,
and
that's amazing.
yeah, and that makes a lot of sense at Google scale, and not even at Google scale, right? I think this is kind of like a philosophy which is not like, which we closure developers can't understand, but I know of developers who really love being forced to write in a particular Go way. Like they don't want to think about how they can make a code efficient. They just kind of love the idea of, there's just one way to do it. Let's do it that way.
Yeah,
I think a
I
lot of
think
people.
hmm,
Yeah.
it's easier, and it makes sense. Like, sometimes I don't want to think. Sometimes I just want to put 15 for loops and 15 error handling statements, and I want to ship, which is fine. And Go wins in the sense that its performance is comparable to, say, even Rust, which is a great boon in my opinion too. So it's the only language I would shift to. Like, if I were to write a backend, Go would be a good organic choice. although I know its shortcomings and the type safety issues, even then I would pick Go. So I think they did a great job with Go.
I think they
It's a very
solve a
solid.
lot of the problems which other languages have, right? Like tooling issues, deployment issues, binary, cross-platform, cross-compiling. I think they solved so many things. Type system,
Performance.
performance, yeah, performance definitely. So they solve so many issues, right? So even if the language isn't as expressive, I think it makes a lot of sense to be using Go.
Yeah,
Concurrency,
it's
right? They solved concurrency for
con-
servers. Like
concurrency is huge, man.
that's
It's
missing in
as bad
all
with
other
Elixir.
languages.
No, so there only Elixir and Go are at the peak of concurrent systems, and
Yep.
Clojure is right there, but it's not. I would not compare it to Elixir or even Go, because the syntax primitives are missing, and also it's a macro, so the introspectability goes away.
Yes.
Yeah, but the CSP is with Go. It's so simple that if you know Clojure or if you have an idea of CSP, you could build concurrent systems that feel like synchronous code. Simply, like, you don't even have to think about async operators.
Yep.
So that's something. And do you have any experience with Elixir? How difficult it is to handle CSP in Elixir?
So if I get this right, Elixir is basically built upon Erlang OTP virtual machine, right? So I kind of know. I'm not sure if it's called CSP, but isn't it like actor and object, like message passing instead of CSP? What they do, like
I
every
think
action is a message which is given to an actor.
uh, I might be wrong, but I don't think that Elixir follows actor model. C follows actor model, or JavaScript follows actor model, or Python for that matter.
Right.
And
So I'm not too familiar with that world. But
Erlang
yeah.
follows channels. Yeah, that's
Okay.
CSP.
Right. Because I am not completely sold on CSP either. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So I kind of believe that CSP makes a lot of sense when you have huge scale, like when you
Yeah.
really need a lot of connections open, when you really need that concurrency. But I think that kind of exposes you to a lot of problems, right? Like I'm not since I've not worked a lot on CSP, but just my cursory knowledge I have, like what limits are there on CSP to avoid yourself shooting yourself in the foot, right? Like uh, how do you handle back pressure in there? How do you handle excess connections? I think those kind of problems, they are very easy to handle with like a thread pool or like a basic, something which we do in the JVM world or maybe the Clojure world. I think that it's much easier to reason than what CSP does. I think that's maybe just my unfamiliarity with it.
Just a
Uh,
second. Just give me a moment. There's somebody at the door.
yep. So
So,
yeah, there's just an
I think
unfamiliarity on my side, maybe. Yeah.
I think it's not many people start. Async is a tough problem. Like, it's tough to reason about. It's tough to implement and also tough to maintain. And most people don't start out with the CSP model. They're introduced to it later in their life or probably never. And most problems are easier to, like, actor model promises and futures are more natural to the way we think. It's more akin to how we communicate with others. But I feel that CSP is better rooted in principle. So I'll give you an example of that. When COVID thing happened, me and a few other friends of mine had created an organization, and we would disperse food kits, like ration kits, and that had some sanitization equipment as well. Uh, we broke down the flows that we had to run. So there was an invoicing flow that we had to procure things and then manage invoices. There was a taxation flow, like we had to gather donations, we had to generate receipts. There was a volunteer management flow, there was a social media management flow. And when we got started, there was a normal hierarchy, like an organization, top down. There's one person at the top who would manage inventory and money, and there were other people who were sitting below them who would talk to people below them and manage one aspect of the system.
Yeah.
But the problem that we faced there was no chemistry in the team, in the sense that we don't know each other, we have never met, we have probably never worked with each other before. And now we have to run this complex operation, and what was at stake was very high. Like you would feel bad if you could have helped somebody, if you had some food and somebody had to sleep without food. So we followed what I say is the JavaScript thread pool approach, like the promise approach, where we had a main thread that was the person on the top, and everything else was asynchronous. So I would ask you that has that donation arrived, and then you'll go and check. I'll wait till then, like it's like an async await. And by that time I might ask somebody about the state of the inventory, or I might ask somebody who's at the go down about if everything is okay, if everything is packed, the status of that. And that's async await, like true async await in real life. But what happens with that is, if one of the process breaks, like if I'm not able to get a status on the inventory in the go down, everything that's dependent on async await breaks down, but this dependence is not clearly defined. So there could be 5 other processes, like my donation, like my delivery schedule, my payment schedule, and my social media schedule is dependent on the status of the inventory in the go down. But there's no clear mapping to it, which means that the main thread will run hot, which means that the person at the top has to maintain all this and reconcile all this in real time. And if it breaks down, or if that person goes away, then the system goes away. But what if we can remove the presence of the main thread and just put everything in queues? And that's what I did. So I don't care about what's happening, you just have to maintain the queue. And I was able to like completely break it down from the top. So instead of a tree, now it was just queues. And the inventory management would depend on the queue, the social media would depend on the queue, and if it's not, and queues were connected with CSP, so queues are feeding into each other. But we did not use CSP, we used Airtable there, and we ran some automation. But it was like CSP because Airtable is also a collection of connected queues. Since then, I think CSP is rooted in principle. Like I was able to find a real world use case, so I'm completely sold on that. But you are right that sometimes async await is just better, it's easier. Every system does not need a proper queue implementation.
Yep, I think you're right in that sense. So that's the thing, right? Not everything which is natural to the human world works wonderfully in the machine world. But yes, I think if yeah, you're right. Like if maybe we were introduced to CSP first, maybe that would
Yes.
have changed the way we write programs today, right? Maybe
Yeah.
we never had to think about threads the way we do now,
Yeah.
and
And
always think about events and queues.
threads are not easy. Oh, like it's very hard to. हाँ जी 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 ठीक है. So it's not easy to reason about threads. Compared to like, if there were the right tools, if the language came inbuilt with tools for CSP, I think it would be great in the sense that it would be easier. And coming back to CSP, and this combines like this joins to UI development. When I got started, probably you too, UI development was not event based. You just rendered pages on the server and you sprinkle some Ajax with jQuery or MooTools, and that's how you achieve reactivity. But now the UIs that we build are akin to data processing systems. So what you would do with Kafka, where you have multiple sources of data and multiple sinks, that's what you do in a React application. That's why it's so tough, because it's evented. There could be events from the user, there could be events from the sockets, or the API or anything. And there are also multiple syncs, so you might have to make an API effect call, or you might have to change the UI, or you might have to persist state. And do you think that we should consider CSP for front-end applications? Just imagine you take reagent and you remove the atom and you put in a core async channel there.
Right. So isn't that kind of like, isn't reframe kind of based on that model, right? Like
Yes.
all the events are actually queued, and then each of the events and side effects are kind of removed from the queued and then applied.
Yes.
But just
Redux
to
also.
bring one more point, which I kind of notice, is that in the food distribution system which you built, right? I don't think that is purely CSP. At least the human world of it. I think it's more like what Erlang is. Right? I just googled this. Like, is Erlang an actor model or a CSP? I just read one line. So from what I remember is that Erlang has each individual unit or task as a process. Like it's an act. It's like a different code. Like you write a different piece of code, different file, which is completely independent from rest of the system, and it just gets a message. So for example, in your case, you are sending a message to the person in the warehouse, like this is the message, like is there food available, and then the warehouse person knows what to do of this message and give you a response. And there is dependencies which you say, right? Like it's not defined, but here the dependencies are defined. Like if this message goes to this actor, this is the response. If this message goes to this actor, this is the response. And this by default is fault tolerant. Like like I can send you the same message again and I can get an answer. Like that is what is fault tolerant here. So even if I do not give you the message in time, you can still get that message from me in the future. And the person who is dependent on you for the message, right? For example, if I really want to get some information from you, my promise is never broken, because I know that the information which I need needs to be acted in this way. So I think that's where Erlang and CSP are a little bit different, but this is just cursory knowledge I have. Like I'm no expert here, so maybe I'm wrong.
Like I need to read about Erlang as well, because I was introduced to the Erlang VM because of Elixir. Like there was a documentary on the creator of Elixir, and he showed like this channel based approach. But I think in that sense, Go wins then, like out of the box, and Clojure as well, because with queues you get time traveling capabilities, so you could go back and see where the bug was made, or where your data, the reconciliation of your data broke, if you have multiple streams and you have to reconcile them.
Right. So one question I've always wondered in Go is that if CSP is amazing, right? And let's say I'm interacting with a database. Now I really don't want to create 10,000 connections to my database. So I still need like a database pool, right? Like where I'm limiting my connections. So now I have like a non-CSP model, which is Nginx or whatever is coming. It goes into a CSP model, and then I'm waiting for another resource, which is again not purely concurrent, right? Like it has some limitations. So I think that is where I was not really convinced. Like I just don't know like what's the solution to that. So that's a mistake a lot of people will make. Like it's CSP, wow, let's just open up database connections.
I think Haskell has an answer to that. Just push the side effects to the edges.
That's
push the pools to the edges, and everything inside your system is CSP.
That makes sense.
That's how most people would do it, probably. I that's how I would do it.
That's interesting.
Whenever you come to Haskell, somebody who writes Haskell, I don't write Haskell, but I can think from the perspective of somebody who writes Haskell that every system that we build is just state and side effects. And then you can just take that knowledge and fix it. Like even the operating system that we're talking about is a side effect. The browser is a side effect. We started with the discussion that the browsers as a side effect is not very efficient, but the operating system is. So it just boils down. It's connected. Like Haskell people have got it right.
That's definitely true. I think everything in the world can be distilled to pure and side effects.
Yeah, and you push side effects to the edges. And I think that's what we have done as a community as well, because marketing a big language is not up to us, and we treat it as a side effect, and we let information flow wherever it is flowing from. And internally, we are just pure functions. We are pure transformations of influence, of mentorship, and companies, and take job openings and the products we have already built. And that leads to us continuing to produce and use JavaScript applications and sync to software fatigue.
Beautifully said, yeah.
On that note, let's just conclude this call. That's a really nice conclusion that just came from
Yes,
your
yes,
side.
absolutely. And I think we
Okay.
digressed a lot, right? Like we started, like we reached, like we were talking about React Native, and now we are ending with side effects.
Yeah. That's how the world is, man.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll just say thank you, and you stay on
Thank
the
you so
call
much. Yeah.
because we need like a conclusion. So thank you so much, Mitesh, for joining me. I'll just
Same
publish
here.
this somewhere, and if anybody wants to contact Mitesh, his blog and his Twitter and his Instagram, everything is in the description. Go ahead and read his
Awesome.
blog. It's very well done. He has been writing for a very long time, and subscribe to his YouTube channel.
Yeah. For Clojure, Emacs, Lispy stuff.
Crispy stuff
Yeah.
on Mitesh's channel. Thank you so much, Mitesh.
Thank you so much, Shivek.